Welcome back to Quiet Part Out Loud. I'm Dr. Jack Mumford, and today we're diving deeper into our exploration of whether the Bible is inspired by God or invented by man. If you've been following along, you'll know that in the first episode we laid the groundwork by examining the manuscript evidence and early dating of the New Testament. We established that the New Testament is not only the most well-preserved text from antiquity, but also one of the earliest documented, making its historical claims highly reliable. In this second episode, we're going to build on that foundation by looking at three critical areas: eyewitness accounts, archaeological corroboration, and non-Christian sources. Each of these topics adds another layer of evidence supporting the reliability of the New Testament. So let's get into it. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence for the reliability of the New Testament comes from the eyewitness accounts recorded in the Gospels. Luke opens his gospel with this powerful statement: "Many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those from the first eyewitnesses and servants of the word." Luke chapter 1, verses 1 through 2. This underscores a key criterion for what the early church accepted as inspired by God. It had to be written by an apostle or someone close to them. The early church was meticulous in ensuring that the writings they recognized as inspired were based on first-hand testimonies. This was true for how disciples were selected, as with Matthias replacing Judas. He had to have witnessed the resurrected Lord, and it was also true of those seeking to write down what had happened. Luke, for example, was not an apostle, but a close companion of Paul. We know he was a companion of Paul's due to the inclusion of "we" passages in the second half of Acts, indicating that Luke was present with Paul. Plus, Paul refers to Luke as a companion of his in Colossians, Philemon, and 2 Timothy. Further, as Luke states, his gospel is informed by those who were eyewitnesses from the beginning. This close connection to the eyewitnesses is crucial because it ensures that the accounts we have in the New Testament are grounded in direct, reliable testimony rather than hearsay or later inventions. However, the fact that these accounts were written by different people, each with their unique perspectives and sources, sometimes leads to variations in how certain events are described. Skeptics would say these variations would bring into question their reliability. These differences are not contradictions. Instead, they offer a fuller, more nuanced understanding of what happened. For instance, consider the accounts of the empty tomb in Luke's and John's Gospels. In Luke chapter 24, verse 12, Peter is mentioned visiting the empty tomb alone. John isn't even mentioned. But in John's Gospel, not only is John included, but his account provides some interesting details that help to explain Peter's omission. In John chapter 20, verses 3 to 10, we read, "So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked in at the strips of linen lying there, but did not go in. Then Simon Peter came along behind him and went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple, who had reached the tomb first, also went inside. He saw and believed." The other disciple in this passage is John. Throughout his gospel, John refers to himself as the beloved disciple, the disciple whom Jesus loved, or the other disciple, rather than by name. This anonymity was likely a protective measure in a time when both Jewish and Roman authorities were actively persecuting the early Christian leaders. By not naming himself directly, John could circulate his gospel more safely without drawing unwanted attention. Richard Bauckham wrote a fantastic book titled The Testimony of the Beloved Disciple. Now, why does Luke's account differ from John's? It likely comes down to the sources each evangelist used. Luke, who wasn't an eyewitness himself, likely relied on Peter for his account of the resurrection. Peter, as we see, didn't mention John. No mention of the race either, because it wasn't his focus. and he didn't want people to know John beat him in a foot race. John, on the other hand, adds this detail, possibly because it was a personal memory that stood out to him. Can you imagine? All of the ages, people reading about how you beat Peter to the tomb. So what we see here is not a contradiction, but a fuller picture. The differences in these accounts are not errors. They reveal the personalities and perspectives of the writers and provide further clarity on the events. They give us a more complete understanding of what happened and highlight the authenticity of these personal testimonies. Now, let's turn to archaeological evidence, which has consistently supported the New Testament's historical claims. Skeptics have often questioned the accuracy of specific details in the New Testament, but time and again, archaeology has proven these texts to be reliable. For instance, in Acts chapter 13, verse 7, Luke refers to Sergius Paulus as the proconsul of Cyprus. Skeptics once claimed this was an error, but inscriptions have been found confirming Paulus as proconsul, exactly as Luke described. Similarly, the Pilate Stone, discovered in 1961, confirms Pontius Pilate as the prefect of Judea, corroborating the gospel accounts with history. The Gallio inscription found in Delphi, Greece, confirms the time period when Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, as mentioned in Acts chapter 18, verses 12 through 17. The Caiaphas ossuary, a bone box discovered in 1990, refers to the high priest Caiaphas mentioned in the Gospels. One particularly intriguing discovery is the Nazareth inscription, an imperial edict threatening grave robbers with capital punishment. This edict was most likely created by Claudius in 41 AD due to the events surrounding Jesus' resurrection, showing that the authorities were aware of the claims being made by his followers and were taking them seriously enough to issue such a decree. And then there's the evidence found in ancient coins. The ancient Hebrew, Roman, and Greek coins are a treasure trove of evidence proving the existence of the Herodian dynasty, the prefects of Judea, and the Caesars. These coins are like little snapshots of history, each one confirming the political and social realities described in the New Testament. You kick a stone over in the ancient Near East, and you're likely to find something that proves the Bible true. If someone rejects the idea that the New Testament records real events in human history, it's likely because they haven't examined the evidence or are unwilling to accept what they find. Essentially, they don't know the Bible or history. What about sources outside the Bible? Can we find any non-Christian corroboration for the events described in the New Testament? The answer is a resounding yes. Consider the Roman historian Tacitus, writing around 116 AD. He refers to Christ's execution under Pontius Pilate, stating, "Christus suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate." Annals, chapter 15. Similarly, Suetonius, who lived from 69 to 122 AD, mentions Christus, likely referring to Christ, as causing disturbances among Jews in Rome under Claudius, corroborating the events described in Acts chapter 18, verse 2, where we read about Jews being expelled from Rome under Claudius. The Jewish historian Josephus, writing in the late 1st century, also mentions Jesus, calling him a wise man and teacher, and refers to his crucifixion under Pontius Pilate. He even mentions James, the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ. These references from non-Christian sources provide external validation for the New Testament's accounts. One word of caution with Josephus: don't use the Greek version. It was edited to make it seem like Josephus was a believer in Christ. The Arabic version accurately conveys what Josephus originally wrote, doesn't have the embellishments concerning Jesus' divinity. Instead of Josephus claiming that Jesus was the Christ Messiah, it claims that people believed he was. And it doesn't mention Jesus' post-resurrection appearances or fulfilled prophecies. Mara bar Serapion, a Syrian philosopher, we know it was written around 72 AD based on the letter's reference to the Roman annexation of Samosata. In it, he refers to the execution of the wise king of the Jews, which most scholars believe to be a reference to Jesus. This is yet another non-Christian source that acknowledges the historical reality of Jesus and his execution. Even the heretic Marcion, who lived around 85 to 160 AD, provides indirect confirmation of the New Testament's authenticity. Though he created his own canon, his use of a version of Luke's gospel in some of Paul's letters shows that these texts were widely circulated and accepted in the early Christian communities. Pliny the Younger's letter to Emperor Trajan, dated around 112 AD, is also crucial. In it, Pliny describes the practices of early Christians, noting that they met on a fixed day before dawn to sing hymns to Christ as to a god, and took oaths to avoid wrongdoing. This letter not only confirms the worship of Christ as divine, but also shows the rapid spread of Christianity. Pliny was writing from Bithynia Pontus, over 600 miles from Jerusalem, yet Christianity had already made a significant impact there within just a few decades of Jesus' resurrection. How does a movement that began in a small, relatively obscure region of the Roman Empire spread so quickly and so far so that a governor over 600 miles away is asking the emperor for advice on how to handle these Christians? The answer lies in the power and truth of the message they were spreading. Christianity wasn't a later development or a slow-growing cult. It spread like wildfire, and the historical evidence supports this rapid expansion. This evidence also challenges the claim made by some modern scholars that the divinity of Jesus was a myth developed over centuries. On the contrary, these early non-Christian sources confirm that Jesus was worshipped as divine by his followers from the very beginning. This also confirms that the persecution of Christians was not a later development, but an early Roman practice, showing that the existence and impact of Jesus were not later myths, but historical realities. So why does all of this matter? Because if the historical claims of the New Testament are true and reliable, then the divine claims within them are much harder to dismiss. If the events described, such as the resurrection of Jesus, can be shown to be historically plausible, then we have a strong foundation for believing that these texts are more than just ancient literature. They are, as Christians claim, the inspired Word of God. In the next video, we'll explore internal and external verification, the profound impact the Bible has had throughout the centuries, and touch on a few common objections. We'll continue to build the case step by step as we explore whether the Bible is indeed inspired or merely invented. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you found this video helpful, please like, share, and subscribe to stay updated on the next installment of this series. Thanks for watching Quiet Part Out Loud. The truth isn't always loud, but it can't be silenced. Stay informed, stay faithful, and keep speaking the quiet part out loud. Be on the lookout for our next episode in this series, and until then, God bless.